Hey, what's going on everybody? It's your boy Meteor Kaiser here, back again with another challenge run. Today we are going to be doing Fire Emblem 10, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. We're going to be doing D rank weapons and below only. So basically what this means for us is we're limited to iron weapons. Iron weapons and then your standard like javelins, wind edges, those types of things that are still within the realm of usage because they're D rank. I just can't use anything that's steel or above. My predictions, at least for this run, is it's going to be pretty easy-ish towards the beginning and a lot harder later on, which is probably going to be good for us anyway, because the game gives us worse units in the beginning and better units as we go on. So standard rules, nothing too crazy. Again, only D rank weapons, and I'm going to limit usages of characters that I used too much in my other playthrough, so probably not going to try and use hard too much. I want to stick to characters that I don't give too much of a shot with. Maybe we'll see what happens, honestly. But one big thing to note here is Lagoos are not able to be used besides from Herons. Herons are fine because Herons don't have an acro weapon, but Lagoos have A rank and above weapons. That's their problem. Their claws, their talons, all of that count as A rank or above. So no royals, none of that stuff. Skills and battle experience are going to be fine. We're allowed to use that. Forging is going to be a gray area. I'll only really use it if I absolutely have to, but I'm going to try and stick to not using it if I can get away with it. We'll see what happens. So there are going to be some instances where we can't actually beat a chapter without kind of breaking the rules. Case in point, 1-9 when the Black Knight is a must use because unfortunately Micaiah just isn't quite good enough. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it, and thank you guys so much for your patience. I know it's been a while. I've been slacking, not gonna lie. But anyway, let's just jump into it. Part 1, The Silver Maiden. Under Gray Skies is a very simple, quick and easy chapter. It's just really showing off the Trash Brigade, as I call them. It's just, there's nothing different than normal in this chapter, so I'll basically skip over it. Okay, we have Chapter 1-1, Maiden of Miracles. Nolan joins us, but we can't use him yet as he has a Steel Axe, and of course Steel Axe being a C rank weapon, no thanks. Halfway through the chapter, I do get a hand axe, so it's D rank, so I give that over to Nolan, and Nolan can actually attack. It's great. I ignore the flanking reinforcements as it's a clear in 10 turns chapter. And in this chapter, Edward does land a crit on the boss, Isaiah, so I didn't need to kill him. But hey, a free steel sword to sell is nice. Money's not going to be too important, but storage space will, because I will be buying a lot of iron weapons. Let's move on to 1-2, The Dispossessed. So in this chapter, we get Laura and Best Boy South here. Ledges are introduced into this game. Thank God it's the only real Fire Emblem game where the main concept is ledges. They're in other Fire Emblem games that later on the line, but they don't really have that big of an impact onto the gameplay. So the whole concept of ledges is if you're up on the top side and you're attacking somebody on the bottom, you could basically hit with them with anything and it'll end up hitting because the accuracy is really good. However, if you're on the bottom and you try and hit upwards, you're going to have a really accurate weapon and a really strong unit because attacking up is just not going to work very well. The only one that can maybe pull this off is South because he's a pre-promoted unit. South comes with 2 weapons here, a card and a bronze dagger. The card is, I believe, a C rank weapon, so that's no. And a bronze dagger is a D or E rank, so we're chilling. I grab all the chests with South and clear the boss Zaitan with him as well. He ain't as broken as Titania, but South is still really good in Part 1. Part 1 would not be able to be beaten unless you use South. Well, actually, you could probably do it. It would just be very painful, and I'm not into that kind of torment, especially with the Dawn Brigade. Do not like Dawn Brigade, but that's not exactly an uncommon opinion. The objective of the chapter is to have Laura arrive, so we do that real quick, and we move on to 1-3, A Faint Light. Kinda hardish chapter, probably one of the hardest ones for Part 1, honestly. So we have 2 new units, Ileana and Aaron. Both of them are kind of meh, but they're useful for early game. Aaron, of course, being a soldier, and Ileana being a thunder mage. Enemy reinforcements pop up a lot here, especially behind, so we have to send units back to where Kurthnaga and Amy are at. Kurthnaga and Amy are green units that we have to protect. That's one of the objectives of this chapter, and you can order them to go to specific areas, which is what I'm gonna end up having to do. Kurthnaga is pretty defensive, but Amy will die in like 1 hit, so kind of annoying. A lot more defensive units like Knight show up here, so South acts as a blocker until his bronze dagger runs out, and then basically he's just a tank because he can't attack, because which is just great. This is going to be a theme. After that, I have to use Aaron, Edward, Nolan, and Micaiah to clear up the rest of the chapter, including Burton, who goes down to a light tome hit. All I have to do is escape, so I don't need to clear. It's just the one thing that's going to be kind of a pain in this game is the reinforcements pop out of nowhere. So it's just going to be, honestly, the best thing to have is map knowledge. And since I haven't played this game since I did my last video on this, so it's been a hot minute. But anyway, let's move on to 1-4, A Distance Voice. This is the first map that involves enemy Laguz units. It's also the first map with a base, so this means we can start buying some weapons. So I pick up some iron weapons and some other D-rank weapons, including those 2 range weapons I was talking about earlier, like Wind Edge, Javelin, Hand Axe, all of that. So Laguz are pretty powerful, but they can't always attack, because they're not always in beast mode, and they only have 1 range of attacking, so the best thing to do is attack them from range and block them with South. So that's what I end up doing, is I leave South to the north path to block that area with Leonardo, and I send the rest of the team left with our new unit, Meg. Meg is not exactly what I would consider a good unit. I'd love a run where I'd actually try and make her viable, but this is not that run. I'd rather do that when I actually have access to weapons that can carry her, not having to rely on bad stats to not carry her or something. Yeah, we'll go with that. I focus on Agony first and take him out with Aaron after Soth makes his way around the side to help. Pain gets taken out with a combo with Aaron, Edward, and Micaiah, which seems to be kind of this early game tactic that I have, is just start with Aaron because he's defensive, and then end with either Edward or Micaiah, because Micaiah definitely cannot take an enemy hit, but she can deal a decent amount of damage, especially once she gets Thaney. Since most of my units are pretty bad at the beginning, it's really just an easier strategy to just gang up on single enemies and kind of put myself in a situation where I can do that, because the only one that can really, again, tank any hits is South and maybe Aaron if we're lucky here. So we move on to 1-5, The Lost Heir. We get Valug here, but of course since we can't use any Laguz, he's basically just a spot taker upper, which is definitely a word. And with this chapter, you got to defend for 6 turns and make it to Jill, Zehark, and Torneo, because if we don't, Zehark and Torneo will be fine, but Jill will die to archers, because the archers will make it there in time, and Jill's the weakest of the 3. So because I didn't really realize that on the first attempt, I do have a reset, because I tried rushing up to the left side, and that just did not work. So instead, on the second one, I go ahead and split up my units. So I have a couple of them go on the left side, and then I have the others kind of go up that ledge, my stronger units being South, Nolan, and then I have my other units, so I have Edward, Aaron, and Ileana stay back to deal with flanking units, and then Micaiah, Meg, Leonardo wait up the stairs going very slowly, maybe tackling 1 or 2 enemies at a time or something like that. South and Nolan are able to get up as quickly as possible, and they are able to protect Jill, and we move on to chapter 1-6, Raise the Standard. One piece of advice I have is to always check the bargain shop, because they usually have some pretty nice stuff. So yeah, as I said earlier, the weapons, you guys are probably going to get sick of seeing the same items just over and over again, just iron swords, wind edges, iron lances, javelins, iron axes, hand axes. That's pretty much all we can use, save 1 or 2 things. Mages have a little bit of leeway. Mages actually get up to Elfire, which is pretty nice because it's still a D-rank tome, but daggers are limited to iron knives and bronze daggers, so that's the other thing that's a problem with our fiefs, which is only really South and Heather, but we're only going to use South, so we get 3 strong units from the last map, but unfortunately Valug is again a forced deploy. So what I do is I have Jill deal with the flyers because that's just easier. Zehark and Torneo deal with the northern reinforcements, and the rest of them push on to the left, albeit very slowly. Easy chapter as long as you're mindful of the enemy reinforcements, not too bad. And we move on to chapter 1-6 part 2, Raise the Standard. So this is a part 2 chapter, so it carries over without a base visit, so keep that in mind. So I would bring extra vulneraries, extra supplies, whatever, or I guess they're not vulneraries yet, they're herbs. But anyway, the goal here is to rescue and protect the Marauder Knights and Fiona. So I have Torneo take out the left flank, while the rest of the squad pushes northward, where the bulk of the enemies, which are many cavaliers, are at. A lot of cavaliers this chapter. Unexpectedly, Zehark and Jill do the majority of the work, while South and Micaiah kind of are in the mix helping out. I really want to try and get Micaiah as much experience as I can, because by the end of part 1 she will promote into her, I guess, second form, and tagging that along with the experience thing, I steal Paragon off the boss Laverton, which is an amazing skill to have. Paragon will double the amount of experience you get from battles, which is just beautiful. So at the next chapter, I'll slap that on Micaiah, but at least for now, I'm able to finish off the boss Laverton pretty easily with just one shot from the Thani, which is good against Cavs and Knights. Now my gray area is this. Thani does not have a rank, and it's not that great of a weapon with 8 might, and of course Micaiah kind of needs all the help she can get, so this is one where I kind of let slide. There are some weapons down the line that have 18 might and no rank. Yeah, that's a bit much, so I won't use those, but 8 might is not too different from what is already available. It's a defeat boss chapter, so once Leverton's done, we're good. That's it. And we move on to 1-7, A Gathering Hope. So I do equip Paragon onto Micaiah to help her out just to get her to level 20. And by this point, I support a few of my units up with each other. So this game, how it works is you pick units that you support up with. You don't just gain random supports. You have to choose what 2 units are going to support up with each other. There's like a meta for it and everything. I Google whoever does well together, because I doubt I'll bring any of these guys with me to Endgame. And supports are more lenient in FE10 anyway, because you can be like 2 or 3 squares away to get the procs. So I don't really mind if it's 2 units that normally are not supposed to be right next to each other, like a mage and a knight or something. So it's beautiful. By this time I finally get rid of Leonardo and Aaron, so I could bring Jill and Zekehark, who are way better. Chapter's pretty easy besides from the enemy reinforcements catching me off guard and having to babysit the escaped prisoners. This requires me to split off my army into a group that goes after the boss and a group that goes back to deal with these reinforcements. We get a couple new units here. We get Tormod, Vika, and Murim. And of course Vika and Murim are both Lagoos, so the only one I can use out of this group is Tormod. Tormod is somewhat useful as he is a pre-promoted fire sage and he does have an L-fire, so I don't really have to worry about changing his weapons or whatever. The Lagoos sit back and twiddle their thumbs while the rest of the squad moves forward towards the boss area, which thankfully those archers protecting Jir, the boss, do not aggro, which is very helpful because I wanted to bring Jill over there and I'm like, oh god, archers, ugh. I'm always so scared of archers. Jir gets knocked out by a Thani hit and we move on to 1-8 Glory Unwanted. This chapter gives us Nyla, who is an amazing royal who we can't use, but we do get Raphael, who is a Heron, so hey, we can use Herons. Yippee! Oh, and one thing I did forget to mention is we did get Fiona in the last chapter, but let's just pretend we didn't see it at all, because yeah, if you thought Meg was bad, Fiona is worse, which is just crazy. Chapter here is kind of harder without Nyla, but I do use her to rescue one of the prisoners to at least guarantee I don't lose the chapter. I centralize all my units in the north area and wait until enemies come to me. Then, as a group, I move towards the boss area with South leading the charge against the mage Radmin, which sounds like admin, which is funny. This works and we move on to the failure. The failure in case being 1-9, one survives. So as I said at the beginning, I break the rules because I don't just break them all willy-nilly. I try several times to try and solo this with Micaiah, but this chapter is just way too hard for me to even think about doing that, especially tacking on the boss here at the end as well. I could not even imagine dealing with Jared. Unfortunately, Micaiah did not go to Jared. Ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum. There is some hindsight here that I could have given Micaiah an iron sword and traded it, but I didn't really think about that, so oops. But anyway, it's whatever, it's still, you know, oh well, oops. Anyway, we move on to Part 1E, or Part 1 Endgame, Dane Arise. This chapter is kind of hard, only because of the ledges, really. So I do bring the Black Knight, and I do give him weaker weapons, so I do adjust that error that I made before. He covers the rear reinforcements, which is nice because there's a ton of them for some reason, but the thing is the Black Knight is really slow, so it's hard for him to get up quickly. Soph tries his best to catch the thieves that have already robbed the place blind, but fails to, unfortunately. Just can't quite get up there by himself, because Soph is good, but by this point, the enemies are finally starting to do a number to him, or not even a number, they're just damaging him enough that he can't solo the entire chapter. This chapter just takes a long time because of all the reinforcements and ledges. To be honest, it isn't that bad. There are a couple of instances that are kind of annoying. There's some archers that I have to do some kind of lucky dodges with. And then there's that middle gate area right before you go off into the boss area that I block with Soph and Zekehark, but then they take too much damage and I have to bring the Black Knight over to protect. This is the first instance of a promotion. Nolan promotes here into a warrior, that's cool. So again, similar concept where your units will promote. Once they hit level 20, you just let them level up one more time and they'll promote. So that's nice. Don't have to use any items on them. You could if you wanted to get the promotion quicker, but there's not many Master Seals in this game. And it only took a simple 28 turns. Like, that isn't nothing. Jesus Christ. South is able to reach up and smack the shit out of Jared, and that ends part 1. And we are free from the Dawn Brigade for now. Pretty normal so far, minus, of course, not being able to use the Lagoos, and some chapters, some of the enemies are starting to show signs of giving us issues, as I was saying. South is having a harder time dealing with enemies, and just in general, things are getting slightly more difficult. But we're gonna hope that that kind of doesn't happen too much in part 2 of Countries and Kings. So we'll start with a prologue on Drifting Clouds. So now we're going to have a completely different cast of characters, starting with the Queen Alencia from the last game. And chapter 2 is, or part 2 I guess, is a little bit more random with the kind of maps and units that you get. So it's cool. I kind of like chapter 2. It's a little underrated, I would say. So at least in this first part, I did die on my first attempt here because I thought Alencia would do more than I expected her to do, honestly, because she's a queen, which is a 3rd promoted unit. So there's the base unit, it's a 2nd level, and then the 3rd one after that. And this game has those master classes, or I guess, you know, over whatever that would be called, and she's the first one of that. So I kind of assumed that, hey, you know, because she's in this really powerful class, she would do a lot better. But, you know, I kind of overestimated her skills. Now, we get also in this chapter, we get Nailuchi, Har, Marcia, and Leanne. And the objective of this chapter is to protect Leanne. So the problem is, of course, I cannot use Nailuchi because he is a Laguz. So I rescue Leanne with Nailuchi and head to the top left to hide this time. Originally, I kind of had everyone in the middle area, just trying to defeat enemies all willy-nilly, but that didn't work out so well. So I was like, all right, let me pick a corner and hide in it. So Marcia has 2 weapons. The only one that we can use here is the Javelin, because I think she also has a Steel Lance, and obviously that's a C rank, so we're kind of up shit creek without a paddle there. That's the same thing for Har. When he joins halfway through the chapter, he can only use his Javelin as well. Alencia has a Slim Sword and a Mend, but that's it. Thankfully, the Mend is a D rank stave, so I have a little bit better healing than just a simple heal staff, but the Slim Sword is pretty bad. That's just gonna have to be how we make do with it. Thankfully, this is a survival chapter and not a complete chapter, quote unquote. So basically, all I end up doing is having my 3 units take turns protecting Leanne from enemies. So hiding in the corner is the best strategy that I thought of to do, and it works pretty well. With a little bit of patience and mainly Har, I somehow survive the 8-turn timer and move on. I'm not able to beat the boss. However, as long as I survive, that's really all I care about. And we move on to the first chapter, chapter 2-1, Winds of Rebellion. I love this chapter for one reason and one reason alone, because we get Nephany. Nephany is my favorite character in the Telia series, by far, easily. Love her character design, love her personality, love her simple upbringing, and also the obvious parts. But anyway, I digress. So we get her and we get Braum at the beginning of the chapter. She does only have a Steel Great Lance to start, which is pretty annoying to deal with because, again, Steel Great Lance is, I believe, either C or B tier, either or, and there's no shops. And so what I have to do is just do a little bit of strategizing here. Braum thankfully can attack with his Iron Axe, and he's able to deal with the initial enemies pretty decently, and that gives Nephany a chance to be bait, honestly. At this stage, she can't do anything, so the only thing she can do is be bait, and thankfully she's got enough defense that being bait is fine, and Braum kinda has to carry the first part of this chapter. At least the only real threat in this chapter is the boss, so normal units aren't really going to do too much to Nephany, and this is able to buy me some time until Heather joins us up. And what Heather will do is she'll be on the bottom of the map, she'll grab the javelin from the southern house, bring it up to Nephany, and now Nephany can actually do something. Yippee! So that boss that I was mentioning, Yeardley, is a defensive general, but he does not really move until he gets attacked, which is really great, so I'm able to clear out his minions around the side and focus him down with Braum and Nephany. And Heather, I guess. Heather more just takes a hit and almost dies. Heather is a Faith just like South, except the difference between her and South is she's trash and South is actually decent. I mean, South honestly drops off after part 1, but still, South is way better. Heather just doesn't have the growths to match her class, I guess. In the process, my javelin does break, but finally, I'm able to deal with Yeardley. And we move on to what I consider to be the hardest chapter that we have encountered so far, chapter 2-2, Tides of Intrigue. The reason I say that this chapter is really hard is because of this challenge's rules. As you heard from the last chapter, my javelin broke. So that means, unfortunately for this chapter, I'm not going to be able to use Nephany. This chapter is a fog of war with a torch mechanic for light, so lighting them to see enemies will snuff them out as well, and all of that stuff. So we have Mordecai, Leth, Lucia, Nailucci, and Leanne, and they will join the 3 from the last chapter. And because Nephany's javelin broke, the only units I can use here are Brom, Heather, and Lucia, considering Mordecai and Leith are Lagu's units, and Nailucci as well. Lucia has an iron sword and a wind edge, so that's pretty nice. She'll be doing most of the legwork here. Heather is pretty much almost completely useless, but she's a last resort. If I need to like do a couple of extra damage on a unit, I'm sure she can at least manage to do that. So the strat ends up being I have Lucia clear out the front, and then Brom is in the back. And then in the middle, Leanne will be Gowdering. Gowder is the term for her dancing in this game, or the Heron's dance. So she'll be Gowdering whenever, you know, an extra one of these 2 units needs an extra attack. Thankfully, it isn't a route chapter, it is just an arrive chapter, so I don't have to clear the entire chapter, I just have to get to the end. Brom blocks off the south path near the boss, while Lucia takes on Mirage and his men, thankfully pretty easily, because they're slow due to all of the generals, because they're just so tightly packed in there. And Lucia is able to get pretty lucky and is able to crit Mirage, and there we go, thankfully that chapter finished. It was more terrifying going into it, because I was like, oh god, I know I have basically no supplies. But in the end, it didn't end up being too terrible, just more frustrating. And we move on to 2-3, Jeffrey's Charge. Very interesting chapter here. So this chapter we're going to be getting rid of every unit that we have so far, and we're going to be joined with the Crimea Knights. And we have Marcia from the Prologue here as well. Still, most of the knights have good weapons, basically C rank or above, which is annoying. However, we do get a shop in this chapter, so we have to re-equip the whole squad. This doesn't make too much of a difference in the actual chapter, as I kind of treat this more like an auto-scroller, honestly, because you just have a crap ton of green units that end up doing most of the work here. But I still make sure all of my units are attacking and everything, getting experience, because every little bit of experience helps, and the more bonus experience I can rack up, the better. The best thing here is that all my units, besides Danved, have Kanto, so at least even the terrible Astrid can do some damage and then back the hell out of there. I'm honestly surprised Makalov is like not terrible right now. I mean, it's Makalov, so he'll, you know, fall off, but still. Our best units, of course, are Kieran and Jeffrey. They do most of the work, but again, this is a very boring chapter, honestly, and I have a lot of vulneraries, so we're chilling. I think the worst part is just end turning, getting through each turn, because each turn is like a couple minutes, considering all of the green units we have to go through. The rock ballistas are annoying, but not too bad as long as I hide in those forest tiles that are scattered around. Tashoria, the boss, is best baited out of his area with Jeffrey and positioned so he doesn't get sniped by the archers that are on either side. I seize and I move on after I get a nice little crit with Jeffy Boy. And we move on to Part 2 Endgame, Alencia's Gambit. Yes, this is a very short part, like 5 chapters or something. Shortest one in the game, however, it's kind of cool. This is a long ass chapter though. God, this took forever. Okay, so the objective here is to survive for 15 turns or defeat Ludwig. The latter is not really worth risking with my lackluster weapons, so surviving it is. That's my option here. My strategy here is to have Brom solo the left flank, so that works surprisingly well even with all the mages. We get a new unit in Khalil. She joins us here. She's a nice fire sage, so that's going to really help us with doing some extra damage. She's going to be assisting Nephany and Heather in ledge camping, because being on top of a ledge is probably the most broken thing in the game, as I said before. It's going to give them a nice chance to get a little bit of experience as well. Then Har and Marcia do kind of like assisting where they'll attack on either side. I generally have Har stay on the right side to deal with those enemies that are climbing up the stairs on the right. And then I just have Marcia throw a javelin here or there, mainly to help out Brom or whoever needs assistance. Alencia and Leanne are supporting with Gowder and Mend, just whenever needed. Generally, I'll be Gowdering Alencia so she can mend twice. And again, the good thing with Alencia, she has Kanto. Flying units also have Kanto, so that means she can heal and then get out of there. And that's really useful for this game, especially considering we can't have a physics staff. Once we reach turn 8, that brings us to the Crimea Knights joining in on the right side, who unfortunately end up just having to hold their own ground rather than supporting Alencia's group. Generally speaking, I'd have the two groups kind of combine up, meet in the middle, and then encroach on Ludwig's position. However, the weapons that I have on these guys are just not great, so the best I can do is just hold off and hope and pray that I don't get killed. Astrid is already trash 1 chapter after getting her, so unfortunately it's going to basically be the other 4 that have to fight off the rest of the enemies. I do have a couple of green units, which is nice, and that will help pad out my damage a little bit, but that just means I can't really go on the offensive due to my lackluster weapons. As I said before, I'd rather just use the forge as a last resort, only if I really cannot beat a chapter with whatever I try. And at least that's part 2 over and done with. Once we last out those 15 turns, we're on to part 3, Intersecting Vows. Part 3 has you starting off as the Grail Mercenaries from the first game, so that's Ike, Soren, all of those, Goated Squad, and then towards the end it'll have you flip-flopping between the Dawn Brigade and the Grail Mercenaries. Yay, more Dawn Brigade chapters. Can't wait. Let's go ahead and enjoy what we have in front of us while we do. We get access to the Grail Mercenaries, but that comes at a cost. The cost here is, of course, the same thing that happens in the beginning of parts, the lack of a shop. This means that this chapter and the next are going to test my abilities to, I guess, micromanage would be the best term. I drop off the Florette and Etard, the 2 weapons exclusively used by Mist and Ike, because I feel like they're a little bit too strong and I will only use them in a last resort type situation because they have like 18 might each, which is kind of crazy. I'll use it if I absolutely have to, but if I don't, I'm going to avoid it. They don't have a rank as the same thing with Thane, but again, that's what I was mentioning in part 1. Try not to use OP shit if I don't have to. Alright, so the layout of this chapter is the Grail Mercs are on the left side and the Lagoos under Skrimir are on the right. Skrimir is the son of the Lion King, the Lion Prince, I guess you would call him. So currently Titania, Oscar, Mia, and Rolf don't have usable weapons, so the others push on in their stead. It's another Fog of War chapter, but it's easy enough with Gaytree being here as the Vanguard. Since the enemies are only up in one direction, north, I really don't have to cover flanks. So I'll just push on with Gaytree, and I'm really not too worried about him getting attacked. Even if there's a mage that pops up, Gaytree's a little bit stronger than all the enemies right now. I'm not kidding when I say the Grail Mercs are busted. The only ones that are weak are, Reese, Rolf, and Mist, because they're squishies in general. The Lagoos clear up a lot of the enemies once I get to the middle of the map, and Ike takes out the boss Sylvana with a nice crit. Again, nice, simple, very easy chapter, but chapter 3-1, Lagoos and Bjork, is going to be a little bit more difficult. Again, because of the same situation. This is a lot harder for me than it would be for a regular playthrough, because I don't get any usable weapons during this entire chapter. So the durability that I have left over from the prologue is what's gonna have to get us through this chapter. And not only that, we have to route in 12 turns, so I'm gonna have a couple of resets here. In order to maximize my attacks and not just have one unit attack, I have Titania and Boyd, Rolf and Shinon, and then Gaytree and Oscar pair up because they're gonna have to share weapons. So for example, I'll have Titania attack with the hand axe and then I'll trade it off to Boyd and Boyd will attack with the hand axe as well. And that's just how it's going to have to be because I want to maximize as much damage as I can get in one chapter, and considering only half my units have items, that's what I'm going to have to do. It's annoying as hell, but it adds another layer of difficulty to the game, and I really like this. This really made me think. It's the first time I've actually sat down and pondered at least 5 minutes, alright, what do I want to do? I know some people will take forever to make their moves, and I'm more of a, let's just do it and see what happens, and then hopefully it doesn't fuck up kind of person. But this really made me think, and it was kind of nice. So what I end up doing is I have Shinon and Gaytree block off the north path, with Oscar and Rolf backing them up, and everyone else, but mainly Ike, go around and then flank the boss. And then after that, help with the northern area, because there's a lot of enemies that try and encroach on that north path, so it's just easier to do that. I do use Leith and Liar, who are again 2 Lagoos that are joining you as green units as bait. So I'll just have them order to do whatever, and they're gonna help protect Ike, Mia, and Soren. And if I need to, and it's why not? Let's just use and abuse the fact that they're green units while we can. It does take me more than a few attempts, but I barely clear it with any weapons left. We move on to chapter 3-2, Storm Clouds, which is again Grail Mercenaries. I can buy weapons, thank God. Okay, so now that entire difficulty has gone out the window because now we have some weapons. And we load up the squad completely, which now includes Ileana, Nephany, Brom, Heather, and Har. beautiful additions to our squad. Big chapter, but it's nothing compared to the last chapter. God, this is so much easier. I keep my army in one big ball of death, and then I'll slowly pick off enemy forces while moving forward. And if there's some more units than normal, I'll have my greater units peel off and then deal with those threats and then reconvene with the hive, you know? Gotta keep the hive together. While the army is dealing with the boss Istvan and his cronies, Har runs off as bait to the reinforcement flyers. I'm still gonna use Har. It's just like, you know, he was on this chapter. I felt, why not? Let's just use him. We need a nice bait unit right now. It was just a really long chapter, nothing really difficult to it. And we move on to 3-3 River Crossing. I don't like this chapter at all. Very frustrating chapter. The main reason I don't like this chapter is those goddamn horses wasting my time. Every single time you go through your turn, those horses are going to move like 5 steps. And one of the objectives here is to free them and let them escape. And that'll get you some extra items or something. Still, pain in the ass because you have to sit through those animations every single turn. And it just gets on my nerve. The objective of this chapter is to burn supplies and murder the Senate. So that's fun. We love a bit of arson and murder. Yippee! And again, we've got that 15 turns to pull this shit off. Very small area. Unlike the last chapter, this is a very tight area. And the biggest problem with that is my units are getting stuck on each other, which is great. Which also means it's going to be harder to chase down these enemies. Many of those Senate members are going to be able to flee only because I can't get to them in time because units are blocking me. And with D-rank weapons, I can only kill so fast. That's the main thing, is I can't kill fast with D-rank weapons. My defenses might not be any different, but my attack is way slower. So the best units for this kind of run would be those defensive units. So that's probably, even thinking about that, that's probably a good idea to just have more of my tanky units, especially going into part 4. But anyway, I digress, that's way down the line. I do at least get a couple of those Senate members, and I grabbed some decent loot from them. One of them was a white gem, which you could sell for 10k, which is plenty nice. I mean, to be honest, money isn't going to be too much of an issue in this run, again, because if I just sell all the better unit items and I buy the crappy ones, I'm going to have money left over. So as long as I'm not going crazy overboard with it, and I'm not blowing through a shit ton of weapons, I shouldn't have a problem with money on this run, hopefully. Besides that, it's a pretty easy chapter. My units are still going to be able to curb stomp most of these enemies without too much resistance. And the only issue I did have is Shinon did get gang up on, but that's fine because Shinon is bait, which sounds weird for an archer to be bait. But Shinon's got some decent defense in the void, and enemies are going to go after him because he can't retaliate, and I'm fine with that. As long as, you know, they go after him and not my squishies, we're chilling. The boss Veona gets wind-edged by Ike, and that's pretty much all she wrote there. And we move on to 3-4, the General's Hand. I don't like this chapter either. Different reasons. This is just more annoying. Ledges and stuff. Don't like ledges. So we have Ranulf as a force deploy. That's going to happen a lot. A lot of Laguz force deploys. And the objective of this chapter is to have Ike and Ranulf reach the goal at the same time. This doesn't mean you necessarily have to, you know, have to have them perfectly. You just have to have them on the 2 spots. That's all there is to that. That's not too complicated. But anyway, we do get some Laguz allies, which is nice. Nice green units. But in response, the enemies have some ballistas. Yay, we love ballistas. That's going to be real good for my squishies. Yep. Not only do I have to hide my squish units, I also have to deal with ledges. There's a section in the middle where there are 2 ledges above. So the only person that can really get up there and deal any damage with how high of his accuracy is are Soren, and what a shocker, Shinon. Shinon is going to go ahead and go up there, be bait, while I have Soren attack from slightly lower ground. Still only doing like 60-70 accuracy, but that's better than what I was working with before. And as long as I'm able to get a foothold up there, I'm pretty much chilling. Now I have my other units that can't go up that way. They have to go around. So I have Ike lead that charge to block from the archers or the ballista. And then I have my slow ass Gatry. And then my horsemen's, Oscar and Titania, follow up behind. So very pain in the butt chapter, but once you're able to deal with those 2 main issues, ledges and ballista, you're chilling. The rest of the chapter is pretty easy. The enemies themselves aren't that difficult yet. Again, difficulty-wise, game's been pretty nice to us. Well, that's also considering just how great the Grail Mercenaries are. And actually, guys, I think that this is as good a point as any to go ahead and stop, and then we'll go ahead and pick up on the rest of the game on part 2. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your patience with me and my insanely bad upload schedule. I promise I will try to get better at it in this new year. You know, the whole new year, new me thing. But thank you guys so much anyway. I appreciate it, and peace.